first Mr. Professor Mark Widavera, and he is a professor of agri-environmental soil physics and the dean of the Faculty of Food and Agriculture at the University of the West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago. And as an outstanding researcher and internationally sought-after expert, his research agenda on soil physical management and the sustainable use of humid tropical ecosystems have generated many publications in impactful international journals. He is the editorial board chair of the Tropical Agriculture Journal and an associate editor of the Journal of Plant Nutrition and Soil Science. He is also a fellow of the Caribbean Academy of Sciences, a director on the board of directors for the Cocoa Research Center, UWI St. Augustine, and a director for the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute. We want to welcome to the panel this morning Professor Mark Widavera. Good morning. Also with us, Diana Francis, and Diana is the representative of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture delegation in Trinidad and Tobago. She is a graduate of the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, bachelor's in science, economics, and Cave Hill. She has been working in agricultural and rural development, providing policy and trade support since 1989. First at the national level through the Ministry of Agriculture in Dominica, and from 1993 at the regional level. She has provided direct support to ministries of agriculture in CARICOM countries in formulating agricultural and food and nutrition policies and strategies. And that's not all. She's also authored, co-authored, and supported a number of publications and written pieces on a range of topics in agricultural development and food securities. Since 2016, as part of an externally funded EU project, she became more closely engaged with micro and small agripreneurs, including youth and women, and has promoted and pursued projects specifically to support their development and mainstreaming into the formal economy and market system. We would like to welcome to the panel Diana Francis. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, Professor Marlon Knights. He is a program professor of the Bioscience, Agriculture, and Food Technology program at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. And Professor Knights earned his PhD in reproductive physiology from West Virginia University. In tropical, that would be a master's in science in tropical animal science and a bachelor's in science in agriculture from the University of the West Indies, and was a postdoctoral fellow at Michigan State University. He has over 20 years of academic experience, having previously worked at UTT, UWI, Michigan State University, and West Virginia University. He has over 100 peer-reviewed publications, conference proceedings, and abstracts with an emphasis on reproductive physiology, and his research in the field provided the basis for FDA approval of the controlled internal drug-releasing device for use in sheep and goats to control reproduction, and he has received over $1 million in grant funding. And of course, I could go on and on, Professor Knights. Thank you so very much for being here with us this morning as well. So to the three panelists, welcome to the Caribbean Food and Beverage event. And we have been engaging yesterday different discussions, crime and the cost of food. We also look at feeding the Caribbean, how sustainable that is. Today we want to focus about the change in sustainable agriculture. We could first go around to each and maybe get your overall perspective on this particular topic. Professor Widavera.
Thank you very much. When we're talking about sustainable agriculture, of course, we're looking at practices that environmentally or sustain environmental health and also the social responsibility and also the practices that are economically viable. So this will constitute what sustainable agriculture is. And when we speak about change, of course, we are looking at technologies, innovations that we can bring in to change from conventional type of agriculture to something that And so it therefore means that change is necessary in a number of areas when we look at agriculture or the agricultural sector in the Caribbean and in Trinidad and Tobago, because we want to change a number of practices and make them sustainable and ensure that what we are doing, keeps us from keeps us more resilient to the vulnerabilities that we are exposed to. And when we speak about vulnerability, I know when we speak about vulnerability, our minds go quickly to climate change. But we are vulnerable in a number of areas, economic vulnerability and also social vulnerability.
Thank you very much, Professor. Ms. Francis, I saw you nodding your head there a couple of times when he spoke.
Yes, so from my perspective, I do not see a difference in the concepts of change and sustainable development. And I think we have to ask ourselves, first of all, why is there such a focus on sustainable development in agriculture? Right? And that is because from time immemorial, the way, sorry, the practices that we have had, as Professor Woodavera would have said, we have changed our practices to such an extent that they are damaging the very resources that we need for agriculture. And therefore, the whole concept of sustainable agriculture has arisen because there's a recognition that if we want to continue to do farming for generations to come, then we need to change our habits, change our practices, and change the way we do things. Now, we are in a situation right now in the world where technology is driving everything, including farming. So again, we have to ask ourselves the question, if we want to continue producing food to feed the population, what does it mean for change? What kind of change? Who's going to drive that change? And what is going to facilitate that change? Now, we're in 2023, and every year we have a whole new generation coming into the workforce, coming into the world, and they don't do the same things the same way all the time. So we have to embrace change, but we have to make sure that the drivers of that change is leading towards sustainability. And we have to ask ourselves again the question, what is sustainability? It does not mean the same thing for everybody, because nobody is coming at it from the same perspective or the same situation. So the bottom line of sustainability really is, if you want to have this particular resource or this particular food or this particular something beyond your lifetime, whatever you're doing now within your lifetime has to allow it to continue after you are gone. So for farming, the base of our farming in the Caribbean is and will continue to be for a while to come our natural resources, open field agriculture, even if there is AI technology, even if there is protected systems, even if there is greenhouses, even if there is factory farming. Our farmers will continue to use the soil and the natural resources to grow food. And we have to ask ourselves, after decades of poor practices, not just in agriculture, but also in converting the best land for planting into houses, into roads, into hotels, into tourism areas. What is the natural resource base? What is it allowing us to do with it? Has it been degraded to an extent that the amount of investment we have to put back into it is more than justifying importing cheap food? So it's important to understand change. It's important to understand the drivers of change. It is also important to understand and appreciate that the persons that you expect to make those changes, they also expect to get support from whoever has the resources to help them make it. And most times you find the farmers are the ones that are expected to take all the risks, they're expected to take all the investment, but at the same time they are always on the margins, tend to be on the margins of the development. So change has to come at every level, it has to come together. Otherwise, you're always going to find gaps, and there's always going to be a conversation about sustainable development. It's a goal we've had from since data was collected on agriculture and farming, and we have realized that all of the changes over time, for example, the green revolution, where we started growing acres and acres and acres of one crop only. Then we had the gene revolution, which is the bioengineered products, where science was now introduced into the plant itself. And now we have the AI revolution, where you have you have robotics and animation now doing the work of people on farms. So I think what's important is that those of us in the sector understand what is driving that change, understand what it means for those who are doing, and therefore together we need to get to some kind of solution. Sustainable development is not an end target. It's going to always evolve, and therefore we need to evolve with it. So I'm just making a plug, and I'm imploring everybody in the sector that when the farmers come to market with their produce, stop haggling them on price. You don't know what they're going through. They have been the bastions of change over those decades, and nobody has recognized what they have done to change. So I think it's important to understand our roles in the sector, what we do to support change, and what we can do to enhance those who need to be doing the actions for sustainable development in agriculture. So that's my take on it.
Ms. Francis, a lot to think about there. Professor Knights.
Oh, thank you and good morning. So I would like to sort of tee off from where my colleagues left off. And, you know, we are speaking about this topic essentially because we are faced with a situation where we need to be increasing food production to treat with an ever-expanding population, and at the same time, we are faced with dwindling resources. So this is sort of the situation what is driving this discussion. But as we talk about change and we talk about technology, one of the things that we have to step back and ask ourselves is what exactly do we want from the agriculture sector? Because oftentimes we hear of many different roles and responsibilities of the agriculture sector. Whether or not it is for rural revitalization or rural transformation, foreign exchange saving or foreign exchange earnings, whether or not it is food security, food and nutrition security, employment. All of these things are things that we put on the doorsteps of agriculture and say, well, okay, these are the things we want. We need to develop technologies and things to address it. But these different roles and responsibilities requires different technological inputs. It may require different approaches. It may require focus on different types of commodities. And in some cases, they are not always compatible. So for example, we can look at a commodity such as cocoa, and definitely we need to invest in cocoa and continue to push that. That is something that we own, and we have great knowledge and capacity to do it. But will cocoa actually address a food security or nutrition security issue? Okay, so we need to take that into consideration. The other thing that my colleague spoke about, is in terms of increasing production. As we focus on increasing production, and we mentioned things like the green revolution and stuff, there are different approaches, and we have to be careful that we do not make the mistakes of the past. So we can talk about whether or not we are dealing with expansion of agriculture production, intensification, or are we going to focus on increasing productivity or total factor productivity, where we are in fact enhancing production in the face of same inputs or dwindling inputs, because that's what we are faced with. We have the dwindling resources that we have to utilize to increase production. The third point that I want to just touch on is the fact that when we go and we speak about food and nutrition security, we then need to ask ourselves, of these nutrients, which are the ones are we focusing on? Because depending on the nutrient, it would influence what type of production systems that we are utilizing. And some of the sexy technological systems may not address some of the commodities that we need to be focusing on. So for example, if we are to focus on carbohydrate security or protein security, perhaps greenhouse technology may not be the most appropriate things to do this. And finally, just to wrap up, in terms of sustainability and that economic component, because we're talking about farmers need to make money, primary producers need to make money. And for this to occur, there need to be linkages, and there need to, for the primary producer to be able to retain ownership or to get more value as the product moves along the value chain. And so there needs to be that sort of collaboration and dialogue. all of these things, what we do, what we plant is going to impact on the environment, and it's going to impact on the sustainability of our production systems.
A lot of points made there, Professor Knight, especially since yesterday we had a couple panels, and they did bring up the greenhouse technology, thinking that is the way forward. So, but they're speculating into action just yet. So I would like to know, in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, where are we at right now when it comes to a change in farming, maybe even the smart farm solutions? Professor?
Thank you very much. In terms of change and sustainable agriculture, let me start by saying that the mistake that we have made in the past is thinking that everything from abroad we can apply abroad here. And this is a very, very gross mistake because we are unique. We have a lot of peculiarities that we need to focus on. We are small island in the States. We, most of the land that we have for agriculture, or let me even say that we have limited land per capita generally. We have limited land per capita, so we cannot take what is in practice in countries that have expanse of land, flat land masses, and apply it here. And that is why our local technology is very, very critical. And a number of things would have been done. I know my colleagues would have spoken about the partnerships, the collaborations that we've been doing in trying to ensure that local technology is developed, or technologies that are suitable for production in the kind of landscape that we have found ourselves. I mentioned earlier the vulnerability that we are exposed to. And because of this vulnerability, it means that mitigation, increasing resilience is very important. It might not necessarily be important in other regions and other countries. So it is important that we look at this. And there have been a number of technologies that have been put in place where precision agriculture has been applied using a number of technologies, and we know that that can work for us. We could have drone technology has been mentioned, AI technology has been mentioned. There are a number of things that we can bring into, and even sensor technologies where irrigation is controlled by sensors. And one of the peculiarities, particularly as a soil scientist, the variability that exists in our soil. Dan would have mentioned that, of course, we will continue to use the soil resources, and that is very, very critical. There's so much variability. I will say that in my own life, I have not seen soils as variable anywhere as they are right in this small island of Trinidad. So it means that if you have all these variabilities, your management becomes even more difficult, because it means if you're moving from here to there, it's a different soil type, you need different management and things like that. And so these are things that we have been looking at, and these are things that we have been working on, and working not just for us in the academia, but with the farmers and with the developmental agencies and so on.
Thank you so much, Professor. Now, yesterday, a couple times it was mentioned on the panels, they were talking about the palate of the consumer. And with that, it always leads to the consumer's preference for maybe foreign imported agricultural products. So how do we sustain and maybe even bring the palate back to the local produce?
So two things. People need to understand that all of the imported fresh products that come into Trinidad and Tobago, they are very heavily subsidized in their growing countries. So the US, the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, they invest very heavily in the agriculture. So it means that these products can land in Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the Caribbean at relatively competitive prices compared to local products. And we have been accustomed in historical times of exporting all our raw material to Europe, US, everywhere else, and importing the value-added products, and hence why the palate of consumers is towards the imported goods. Now, in the last few years, we have seen, I wouldn't call it a revolution, but we have seen an awakening, particularly because of the COVID as well, when things started getting scarce on the shelves because they could not come in. And you saw the micro and small processors who do value-added, their products became more attractive, more aesthetically pleasing as well as tasteful, and they could compete with imported similar products. So it takes an education, it takes time to shift a consumer away from a particular lifestyle and taste pattern into one where you want to head them to. But it's not just an overnight, and it's not just a single sector response. It has to be a national drive to get a shift in consumer preferences away from imported to local. But at the same time, it does not necessarily mean that because you're trying to capture the local consumer to the local products, it doesn't automatically mean that the local producers do not have to attend to quality issues, nutrition issues, and other elements that makes their product competitive. So there is a thinking that eat what you grow, grow what you eat, etc. That's not as simple as it sounds, right? So it's important that whatever is offered in local agriculture, it must meet the basic standards of safety, of nutrition, and it must be pleasing to the eye. We always say people shop with the eyes, not with because you don't taste it before you buy it, right? So it must be pleasing to the eyes, and therefore you found a resurgence or upscale in a lot of services. You can see some of them right here in the Expo today, offering improved packaging, improved labeling, improved everything, just to make the local product as attractive and as competitively priced as the imported version. So it really is, this is not just an agriculture problem or an agriculture decision. It has to go beyond agriculture. And that is why everybody who's involved in decision making at the policy level, at the support level, we all have to be working towards that same goal. But I want to just point on one thing you mentioned with Mark in terms of farming systems. In the Caribbean, we have, like I said, not just variation in soils, but variation in topography. So Trinidad has fairly large amounts of flat land compared to the Windward Islands. You find farmers on slopes of over 20, 40 degrees high, and they grow. You asked a question about how do we incorporate technology. Mark is correct. We've imported greenhouse technology. Now, if you understand the concept of a greenhouse, is to make something, a place or a space warm in a cold climate. We're already a tropical zone. Why would you want to bring a greenhouse into a tropical zone? So the technology is not the problem. It is the application of the technology in your context that is always missing from those kinds of bringing things forward into local. So I think we need another set of people who are very strategic in their thinking, very forward thinking as well in terms of, and very analytical and can make quick decisions. One of the issues we have in this sector is the pace of making decisions. So I think information, education, collaboration across various sectors, and importantly, reaching out to the consumers continuously, and of course, the response to the local farmers. They really have to get their act together, and we need to help them to do that.
And definitely, I believe Professor Knight could expand on what Ms. Francis just said there in terms of increasing the food production, because I know there are different approaches when it comes to that, to be able to sustain it.
Yeah, so absolutely. So just to follow up on Diana's point, you know, the other aspect, of course, is convenience. So we need to have the materials that we are getting to the consumer in some way that they can utilize it very quickly, they can prepare it very quickly, and at an appropriate price point. That price point, again, is going to be influenced by technology, and are we doing the work, both in terms of making things packaged properly, convenient, and in terms of cost effective. If we look at, for example, in the dairy sector, the average cow in Trinidad and Caribbean probably producing 8 to 10 kilograms of milk per day, versus in developed dairy industries where it's 40 kilograms per day. That makes it very difficult to compete. Even if you remove all the trade barriers and things, it's very difficult to compete with that. So that technology is important. In terms of your question related to production, yes, we can go to the approach where we're just increasing the land area under production or the number of animals in production. Right? And so as a result of that, the amount of land or the amount of animals, we can boost overall production. But that isn't very efficient. And as my colleagues indicated, we have dwindling natural resources, limited space. If we expand too much, we can end up further destroying the environment. So that is a difficult approach. The next approach is intensification, where we are putting actually more inputs into a given particular area. Again, that has implications, environmental implications, cost implications. What we need to do is increase productivity. We need to do the work with the plant species and plant varieties that we have. Can we boost their productivity in the environment that they exist in, our environment, in the animals that we have? Can we do the work in terms of selection and breeding to make them more efficient, make them more efficient when they consume the feed that is in our environment, so we don't necessarily have to be all the time importing grain, corn, and soybean and stuff like that, as opposed to utilizing our forages. So that's the different approaches: expansion, intensification, increasing in productivity. And for us to treat with our issues currently, it must be that we increase in productivity of our plant and animal production systems.
Well, thank you so very much, Professor. Now, as we almost come to a close, I would like to bring to the panel maybe a thought that we could expand on when it comes to our unsustainable food import bill, and of course, still encouraging our local agricultural sector to grow in between that time.
Yeah, with respect to importation, we are talking about a region that involves 90-something% of what we eat, which is definitely unsustainable. It is unsustainable for us to, and we saw it when COVID came, because it means that you will have the money, but you may not be able to get the food to import and other inputs to import. So that in itself makes it very, very unsustainable. And the wars that are taking place as well would have affected the value chain, and that would have left us in a situation where we now have high food prices in our supermarkets and other places. And of course, it's not something that can be controlled by the supermarkets, but it is something that is because we are importing. So it is the whims and preferences of what is happening out there is what is dictating whether we are sustainably living or not. And this needs to change. And there are different, from all the discussions this morning, there are different technologies that are available to us. It is for us to ensure that we are applying the right technology. We are in a small island, tropical region, and we must be cognizant of that. We suffer from the effects of climate change. We're talking about sea level rise, which has resulted in the salinization of our soils, affecting not just the soil for agricultural production, but also affecting the environment, affecting biodiversity, and a number of other things. So we need to look at this carefully and increase
Thank you very much, Professor. Ms. Francis, your thoughts on the food import bill?
I have a little pet peeve every time I hear that phrase about food import bill, because let us take one example, Trinidad and Tobago. If you dissect the import bill for TNT and you remove a lot of the imports that go into agro-processing and further processing, it takes off a chunk already. So you have to ask yourself a question. If you want to remove that from the import bill, what's going to happen to all those agro-industries? Where are they going to get the supply, the raw material supply, intermediate supply, to do agro-processing, to sell? Secondly, a lot of TNT's value-added products end up in the OECS countries and up the chain. So it means that places like Antigua, St. Lucia, Dominica, St. Kitts, they import a lot of those value-added food products from Trinidad and Tobago processors, which is based a lot on imported inputs for manufacturing. So I think we need to stop just using phrases and understand what is behind those phrases to make proper prescriptions. So it's not, yes, we are importing too much to feed ourselves, but it's not just to feed ourselves, it's for industry generation, which generates employment, and TNT is feeding the rest of the region. So we have to understand that food import bill, where it is we can exactly reduce. I think you can reduce all the fresh produce imports, because I think we have enough local people to do all the lettuce, all the cabbage, all the pak choy, all the peppers. We don't need to be importing those things. We don't need to be importing, what do you call that, dough. We already import the flour. We can have locals do doughs and frozen doughs or whatever doughs. So we need to look at the import bill more strategically and determine what is in our best interest to continue to import once we have a reliable source for raw materials for agro-industry, what it is that we really need to invest in doing locally based on a productivity equation and not just based on we want to cut the bill so let us just push money to grow it. No. So I think we need to be more strategic and analytical when we use that term. It's bandied about a lot, but I don't think a lot of people understand what it means and what we need and realistically can do about it.
Thank you very much. Learning something today, definitely. Professor Knights.
Absolutely, I couldn't put it better. I would just add that the importers and the consumers of imported products, such as the Supermarkets Association, they are looking for, they're interested in getting their products, and they have to generate economic activity. And as such, to treat with some of the importation issues, we need to be able to ensure that we have our primary production feeding into the manufacturing sector, the added value sector. I think there's a role and even a responsibility of some of the consumers of the imported products to look, and for want of a better word, backwards. Look at the primary producers. See, there should be a greater engagement with the primary producers to explain what is the quality, consistency of the product that is required, and invest in the primary producers. That is going to be good for the importers because, as was pointed out, the products may be available in some other country, but just cannot get here. Or it may not be available at all. But we still need economic activity to ensure and that economic activity is sustainable. There needs to be investment in primary production. And I appreciate the work of the Caribbean Supermarkets Association. That is one of the things that they are attempting to do to ensure that we have more supply, more input into the value chain.
Because, of course, you remain at the bottom of the value chain if you sell just the primary product. But when you add value to what you are doing, so value addition is important. It is empowerment of our primary producers, of farmers, to add some value to what they are producing. That will bring them up on the value chain. And that will result in some empowerment.
And definitely, I see the panel agrees with that, adding value. So thank you very much to Professor Mark Budavera, Ms. Diana Francis, and of course, Professor Marlon Knight. A very engaging discussion on the changes in sustainable agriculture. And we touched on so many different things here today. We definitely are going to have this discussion once again. So thank you for being part of the first ever Caribbean Food and Beverage Expo, Day 2, here at the Center of Excellence.
Thank you for having us.
Okay.